Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation. This is this week's issue of the Libertarian Angle, the show that brings you the libertarian perspective on the burning issues of the day. As always, I'm joined by my co-host, Richard Ebeling, who teaches economics at the Citadel and former president of the Foundation for Economic Education and former Ludwig von Mises Professor of Economics at Hillsdale College, former vice president of academic affairs at the Future of Freedom Foundation, former professor of economics at the University of Dallas, where we first met. Richard, how's that for an introduction this week?
That's great. I'm just going to say former rather than late. I like the late Richard Ebeling.
I'm glad that you're joining us for the show and that you're still here on Earth.
Okay, we're here, and I'm pleased again that the viewers have kindly given a part of their time to be with us.
Yeah, me too. It's been a while since we discussed the political race. We just finished with our multi-part series on the two world wars. And so I thought, why don't we come back to the political race, because there's been some interesting developments. Namely, the Libertarian Party has entered the fray, which seems to me certainly changing the dynamics of this race, or has the potential to significantly change the dynamics. So I thought, hey, we ought to discuss that. I mean, for the last several months, well, for the last year, it's been a tedious race. I mean, it's been entertaining in the sense of, Trump defeating all the establishment candidates and watching that circus play out, and watching the so-called Sanders revolution and his insurgency that has significantly embarrassed Hillary Clinton, the establishment candidate. But in a libertarian sense, Richard, it's been a tedious campaign season, because the parameters of the debate have really just been over which status proposal is going to be adopted. Should we have less Social Security or more Social Security, more Medicare, less Medicaid? Should people in the drug war be incarcerated for longer terms or lesser terms? Should there be more interventionism in the Middle East or less? I mean, none of this really has any bearing on libertarianism, which of course calls for a dismantling of the entire welfare warfare state. So really, up to just recently, it's been a tedious exercise for libertarians. I mean, it's fun poking fun at their status positions, but it's really a bad time for America. I mean, we're moving in an even darker direction, not only with respect to economics, the out of control federal spending and debt, but also the war on terrorism. We see the blowback like in Orlando. And things are only going to get worse, because you've got two candidates that really want to move America in the same status direction. But all of a sudden, the Libertarian Party nominates two guys that, it seems to me, have all the potential in the world to shake things up here. And that's Gary Johnson, who is the former Republican governor of New Mexico, and then William Weld, the former governor of Massachusetts, both former Republicans. And it seems to me that all of a sudden you've got a ticket that just might be credible to the mainstream America, to the mainstream media, two former governors, and that all of a sudden it turns out that Johnson's at 10% in the polls. In the most recent poll, he had climbed up another percentage point to 11%, which is really incredible when you consider the history of the Libertarian Party. They're always at 0.5% or 1%. And suddenly they've got a ticket here that's at 11%, and they're, of course, all over the mainstream news media because they're two former governors. It seems to me, Richard, that this could truly change the dynamics of the race. If they get up to 15% in 5 major polls, and I don't think anybody's defined what the 5 major polls are, but if they do that, they get into the presidential debates. And so I think this has the potential to really raise libertarianism up into the public eye, in the public arena, the political arena, as much, if not more so, than Ron Paul did in his 2 presidential campaigns. What do you think?
Well, the gist of my comments basically just going to be mostly a form of a complimentary survey of what you've just said. I think a large part of the seeming opinion poll position of the Libertarian Party is precisely because of the disillusionment, the contempt, the disappointment, the frustration, the fear that a number of Americans have about the choice that they're facing in November. And that is, on the Democratic side, Hillary Clinton, and on the Republican side, Donald Trump. Just think of their responses so far to that terrible tragedy in Orlando. Trump basically uses it as a grandstand for his own ego trip. This confirms that it's all a matter of Muslim Islamic terrorism. I have said these things in the past. It shows his cult of the personality, to use a phrase that became in referring to Stalin, a cult of the personality, which again, everything is about him, with no substance or interpretive understanding of what causes things and what the solutions might be. And then therapy ooze from Hillary Clinton. Oh, I'm with you. I love minority communities. I will see that all of these things are taken care of because we can do it together through diversity and love. I mean, this is as if, she's going to bring all of the groups together for a oneness and a wholeness of kumbaya. I mean, now, these are our choices. And then when you dig beneath their, in my humble opinion, revolting personalities, Mr. Ego Trip Contemptible and Miss phony baloney empathizing ooze, you find that, as you were saying, they represent merely variations on the same status theme. Now, Trump talks about preventing American businesses from moving their plants and equipment abroad. He's going to recreate jobs, and he's going to build up the military, and he's going to make rich people pay more, even though he says that he's going to be lowering taxes for all. And then, on the other hand, you have Hillary Clinton, who is the most acceptable status quo candidate to the mainstream of the political establishment. She believes in America's alliances with other countries around the world. She believes in preserving the social safety net and being more inclusive and more pervasive for all peoples. And she's going to see that the regulations tame the market even more, and equality is eliminated through redistribution of wealth. But of course, all the time in which she will be pandering to the Democratic Party's variations on the special interest theme, and no doubt either while, if not in the White House, when she would leave it, laughing all the way to the bank, the way she and her husband have already done with the Clinton Foundation. These are the alternatives that the American people are facing. And in that despondency and frustration and anger and fear, as I said, now the Libertarian Party arises, in which they seem to offer an alternative. Now, I am very cognizant of the fact that in libertarian circles themselves, there are degrees of controversy and dispute and debate about positions, stances, attitudes of the two candidates for president and vice president. But I would suggest that what is more important than a certain purity on every specific issue from my own point of view or other classic libertarian points of view, or differences of emphasis on issues in a campaign, is that not only can the Libertarian Party draw more votes, but we who care about liberty could be riding on this higher awareness and recognition of libertarian ideas through the Libertarian Party to advance an intellectual awakening among our fellow citizens. Let's be real. Gary Johnson is not going to be taking the oath of office next January and taking up residence in the premier public housing project of the United States, the White House. Okay. Instead, we should view this as a soapbox, not just for him, but other libertarians in the society, because of people's interest and awareness and attention, because of the frustrations with the two other parties, to be explaining, articulating, and advancing an appreciation of why the ideas of freedom are important, what they represent and entail, and how they are radically different from what the two major parties are offering the American voter. So that, not in this election, but looking at some future election, we can change the climate and the current of opinion in the country sufficiently that maybe someday, maybe not a pure libertarian, but someone who is far more libertarian-like and actually does try to reduce the size of government and its pervasive tentacles over society and rethink America's place in the world may be possible, and that someday a libertarian-like candidate may put his hand on the Bible, take the oath of office, and serve in the White House, but also maybe sell it off as private property as part of his economic reforms.
Yeah, you and I both have a very strong confidence in the power of ideas. And we've shared this conviction for the whole 40 or so years that we've known each other. And the idea is that we want to reach a critical mass of people that favor libertarianism, and that will bring a shift in society. And so the election of a president will reflect that shift. But the shift starts at the base within the population. It doesn't start with trying to change the congressman. That they're sort of like the chameleons. Their colors will change in accordance with how public opinion changes. So we believe in the power of ideas out here in the hinterlands to either find people or influence people's thinking, even if it's single issue things like the drug war. If we can get enough people to end the drug war, well, that's a libertarian position, but we now have lots of conservatives and a lot of liberals that are jumping on that bandwagon. Well, it doesn't matter that they don't support the whole libertarian paradigm, that we can repeal some of these programs one at a time. But I share the same thing that you're saying about Hillary and Trump. That there is a tremendous degree of antipathy, obviously, to both candidates, and rightfully so. I mean, you couldn't find a better example of the establishment candidate than Hillary Clinton. You know, and President Obama says that he's going to go campaign for her. He wants to protect his legacy, the media is reporting. Well, what does that mean? That means he wants somebody that's going to continue everything that he and George W. Bush did. The bombings, the killings, the welfare state, the warfare state. Because if somebody got in there that wanted to change directions and said, hey, let's move America in a different direction, that's a slam against him. That's hey, we're tired of the death and destruction that the U.S. death machine has done in the Middle East, and that's not what he wants. He wants to continue. I mean, the greatest thing that ever happened to George W. Bush is that President Obama continued his policies, made him look good. And then Trump is really no different at all. Now, I think a lot of people are going with Trump because they sense that he's independent of the machine of like the national security establishment, the Pentagon, the CIA. But by and large, his philosophy is as statist to the core as Hillary's. And you know, the way I look at it is that Trump reminds me sort of an American Benito Mussolini, and is going to be incorporating a lot of the fascist economic policies and the interventionist foreign policies. And Hillary reminds me of a female Fidel Castro, that socialism is so important to her, and we're going to see more of that. And in the meantime, and then they both overlap on foreign policy. And so there's a lot of antipathy. You see that with people supporting Sanders, and you just see it in the revulsion against Donald Trump. What's interesting about one of the interesting things about the Johnson-Weld ticket is that the polls reflect that he is drawing more from Hillary's side. Now, you'd think as two former Republican governors that they'd be pulling more out of the Trump side. And it seems to me that the logical explanation for that is their foreign policy position. All right, they may not be, and they're obviously not purist libertarians. I don't see them calling for a total dismantling of the national security establishment, bringing all the troops home. But clearly, they are non-interventionists overall in philosophy, at least Johnson is. And you can see that in the way he talks, is that he's very, very skeptical of what's going on over there. And my hunch is that that's why, and on the drug war too, I mean, I've already seen leftist articles on leftist sites saying, hey, John, let's take a look at Johnson here, because he calls for ending the drug war, at least on marijuana, but sort of silently or not so vocally on overall drugs, but that's caught the attention of the left. And then a non-interventionist foreign policy. So I think that has to be the reason that a lot of what are obviously the Sanders supporters are coming over and supporting him. But also on the Republican side, I saw where Mitt Romney said that he would have to look at Johnson's positions. Well, that even indicates that he would consider supporting Johnson. So when you've got some of these anti-Trump and anti-Clinton people, Johnson may be at the right place at the right time, whether he wins or not, or has a chance to win or not. Seems to me that if he continues rising in the polls, more people, even if they come over to the libertarian side for the wrong reasons, that, hey, I just hate Trump and I hate Clinton, that they start looking at what libertarianism's all about. And that's where we come in. We can say that here is what the real libertarian position is. It's ending the drug war on everything. You have a right to be free, where we discuss the moral aspects, the philosophical aspects that really you're not going to get into in the political arena. You're going to deal with sound bites mostly in the political campaign. But as people start Googling and saying, well, who is this guy? Because I'd say most people have never heard of Gary Johnson. They start looking at it and say, hey, let me see what libertarianism's all about. This is where we need to seize the day, Richard. This is where we can do some open field running on coming forth and telling people. I mean, that's why, working on this video series that you're doing on Austrian economics that I'm really excited about, and I know you are too, that we've got to, we have an opportunity to explain to people as an example. This is what Austrian economics is all about. And just as an explanatory note, Richard's done this fantastic video series for us. It's an introduction to Austrian economics. And we're now working on the ebook side of this thing, and we're trying to get it done. But that, to me, Richard, is how the Libertarian Party and what's happening with Johnson-Weld give us the opportunity to say to people, here's what libertarianism is all about. It's the most exciting movement in history. And this is why you ought to consider looking at it and joining up with us.
I think we should not discount another element of this that is complementary to what you just said. And that is, historically, while the United States has been a two-party system, when there have been relatively successful third parties, such as the American Socialist Party in the early decades of the 20th century, they clearly took votes away from one party more than another. And the party that was losing votes to a party that was even more left, and that was the Democratic Party, ended up having to say, can we afford to lose elections or be threatened with losing elections by allowing people on our left to be presenting their case and getting the votes? And that's one of the things that made the Democratic Party over the early decades of the 20th century move to the ideological left on socialist or welfare statist policies, because of what had been the appeal, the voting appeal of the Socialist Party. And so the Democrats felt they had to incorporate those ideas to not run the risk of losing elections. Now, the same thing here. Traditionally, for the last half century or more, it is the Republican Party that claimed to be for free enterprise, individual liberty, constitutional limited government. Now, of course, they betrayed all of those things. They were hypocrites who were more concerned with power in Washington than practicing and helping to preserve or restore the ideals that their rhetoric said they were for. But if Trump were to be a disaster on election day, and if Johnson were to get that 15, or let's dream 20% of the vote, but let's say 15% of the vote, and now the Republican Party has to rebuild itself, and they have to ask themselves, where are the constituents to restore our legitimacy and winning capacity? They very well, separate from what the Libertarian Party does, can end up having to adopt and actually give more than rhetoric to win elections. Some of the more limited government individualist principles that they have been betraying for so long.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point because I really think the Republicans, well, they've both been suffering from a severe case of hypocrisy, the Democrats and the Republicans. But the Republicans, in the sense that they have this mantra of free enterprise, private property, free markets, limited government, and yet supporting every socialist and interventionist program that comes down the pike. And so they lament the fact that Trump's their nominee, but really, Trump, to me, exemplifies everything that they have stood for and done, which is stood for nothing or stood for everything. A hodgepodge of ad hoc positions that really has no philosophical consistency to it at all. The other issue is the immigration issue on this thing, which is kind of interesting, because all the Hispanics are going with Clinton because of the way Trump is badmouth Mexicans and other immigrants, Muslims, and so forth. But let's face it, Clinton's no winner either. I mean, her boss is the biggest deporter in chief in history. He's deported more illegal immigrants than any president. It's not widely reported, but that's a fact. And so people say, oh, he is not enforcing the immigration laws. He's been enforcing them viciously, just like every other president. The fact is, they just don't work. But that's why a lot of people are gravitating toward Trump, that he's going to finally make immigration controls work with his Berlin kind of wall. Well, along comes Johnson and Weld, and they're very sympathetic toward immigrants. Now, are they calling for open borders like you and I do? I don't think so. But you can tell that their tone is totally different from both Clinton and Trump. In fact, I got a big kick out of Weld coming out in one of his first statements before he even got the vice presidential nomination, where he said that Trump's deportation plan reminded him of Kristallnacht. And that just hit the media all over the place. And that's the type of thing that I think can shake up a race, because they really are not arguing over principle when it comes to immigration. But if there's a libertarian in the race that at least is talking about the benefits that immigrants bring to a society, and why this reign of terror that is being unleashed by the Democrats and the Republicans over the years, and that Trump wants to unleash even more, is a bad thing for America and a bad thing for freedom, that could change the dynamics of the debate here.
I agree, and I think this issue of the Hispanic vote is important from a libertarian perspective. A lot of people argue, if you read like the mainstream pundits, that the Hispanic vote, quote, naturally goes for the Democrats because they're inclusive, they're tolerant, they're believing in cultural diversity and sympathy for the illegal as well as the legal immigrant. While the Republicans are closed, they're fearful and afraid of immigrants. And in fact, there's a thing called the self-fulfilling prophecy. And the fact is that precisely because the Republicans and too many conservatives choose to view immigration as a threat to America. Now, of course, they never say it in the full sort of Trump sort of rhetoric, but they believe that allowing aliens in America somehow threatens the true culture and traditions of America and Americanism. And that if you let them in, they're all naturally leftists. Trump calls them rapists and murderers. As far as conservatives are concerned, they're all leftists and collectivists who want to live off other people's money. Now, if you tell that publicly and you show that contempt and disrespect for other human beings, the vast majority of whom are not, quote, welfare bums, unquote. And anyone who lives in parts of the United States with large segments of Latin American Hispanic communities, legal and illegal, knows that these people, like other waves of earlier immigrants, take often the bottom of the ladder rung jobs, that they work long hours, often for very modest pay, precisely not to be on welfare, not to be dependent upon government handouts, to have a sense of self-respect and dignity, and one presumes through their example, setting a course for their children. But because of the contempt and fear that conservatives and Republicans have, and therefore pushing away the Hispanic portion of the American community. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, because then where do they have to go to have a sympathetic ear in the political arena? No place but the Democrats. And then the Democrats have hooked a segment of the population that has, in principle, no natural affinity to be connected with the Democrats and their welfare statist agenda. That is what's important with libertarians, in my point of view, because the libertarian position is a respect and a dignity and a view of people as individuals. Yes, are there cultures, languages, historical backgrounds? Do people have affinities for them? Yes, but in the widest and most fundamental political and cultural sense, libertarians speak about the respect for the individual and the philosophy of individualism, as real classical liberals always took the attitude towards earlier waves of immigration in the 19th and early 20th century. And if libertarians can get their message across, that there is a third alternative that respects them, values them, and does not view them as a political pawn, either to push away or to attract with welfare goodies, but emphasizes their qualities and characteristics that make them no different than the waves of our parents and grandparents and great-grandparents who populated this country, then a large segment of a growing segment of the U.S. population can over several election cycles be weaned away from the democratic welfare status siren of handouts and protection and pandering, to realizing that there is a political perspective that offers a sense of dignity, self-responsibility, and respect for hard work and raising one's family on sound ethical principles rather than state dependency.
Yeah, and you're right. The immigration issue provides a perfect opportunity for doing that. I mean, we talked earlier about the hypocrisy of Republicans when they talk about free enterprise and free markets. Well, that's all open borders is free markets and free enterprise. Where people are crossing borders, they don't have to become American citizens any more than Americans that go into Mexico and retire should become Mexican citizens. You retain your citizenship. If you want to apply for citizenship, fine, but you don't have to. You just engage freely in enterprise. And so there's that hypocrisy on the Republican side, but there's also the hypocrisy here on the Democratic side, where they say, we love the poor, the needy, and the disadvantaged, and they use that as their justification for the welfare state. And as you know, Richard, I grew up a Democrat. I was a liberal. I grew up in South Texas, and I believed in all these free government programs. I thought this was a legitimate way to help the poor. And one of the things that finally hit me was how they were treating illegal immigrants, jailing them for just getting a job down in Laredo, just for working. They would raid farmers and ranches and stuff like this, looking for illegal aliens that were working in the fields. And that's when it hit me, of the hypocrisy of the Democrats on this issue. That if you love the poor, needy, and disadvantaged, why would you treat illegal immigrants this way? They're among the poorest people you'd ever find. And that's when I realized that they were suffering from the same hypocrisy, and their support of the welfare state had nothing to do with love for the poor, but just love of government power, largesse, welfare money distribution, helping out contractors, and the like. And so the libertarians, as you point out, that we place a dignity in the human being and the right of people, fundamental rights like Jefferson talked about in the Declaration of Independence, to pursue happiness. And that right adheres to every human being regardless of citizenship. Jefferson made that clear. These are human rights, natural rights, God-given rights. And so where it seems to me that the libertarians have the potential here, part of this political race, is to shift the course of discussion, where people are talking about these concepts that we're talking about: libertarianism, the right of the individual to pursue his own happiness, the fundamental rights, God-given rights, the things that you don't hear about and you haven't heard about for the last year. That's where I see the hope here, is that maybe if these two candidates, Johnson and Wells, start rising in the polls, that the media then has to address their positions. Whether we should just end the drug war entirely. You haven't seen that in the debates. I don't know of one reporter that has asked the candidates, how would y'all feel about ending the war on drugs? It's always over reform. How do you feel about mandatory minimum sentences? How do you feel about asset forfeiture? How do you feel about President Obama's pardon plan for drug offenders? Nobody's asking, how about ending this immoral war that Milton Friedman said should have been ended, some 40 years ago, should never have come into existence. That's where I see the potential advantage here, shifting the course of debate and discussion, where people like you and me then can have these shows and say, hey, here is why the libertarian position is the moral position. Here's why it's the best thing that could ever take place in America.
Yes, you see, if one looks back over the last year, the debates, the candidates on the campaign stumps, the fact is that there have been two primary thrusts to virtually everyone's argument in both the Democratic and Republican parties, and that is power and plunder and privilege. There is one word that has been left out of this, the L word, liberty. Now, I know that one or two of the Republican candidates who fell by the wayside would use that rhetoric occasionally. But the fact is, in terms of substance, virtually everything that all the candidates talked about, and certainly the two now who will be running for the presidency at the end of this nominating process, have certainly emphasized power, plunder, and privilege. They're merely arguing over power for what, privilege for whom, and plundering to whose benefit.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right that if all of a sudden the news media had to start talking about freedom and what a free society really consists of, because let's face it, everybody's convinced that all this is freedom. The whole interventionism in the Middle East, the big military empire, Social Security, Medicare, the welfare state, in their minds, that's freedom. When all of a sudden libertarians come along and say, wait a minute, those are the things that are opposite to freedom. Here's what real freedom is. Then all of a sudden, if we can get the media to start talking about concepts of libertarianism, then we might be able to achieve some real breakthroughs here in the months ahead and even in the aftermath of the election, however it turns out. Because remember, even though Ron Paul failed in his quest to be president, look what happened to the libertarian movement as a result of those races. Yes. I mean, you got young people in droves that are now committed, ardent, knowledgeable, eloquent libertarians.
Absolutely. Let me sort of put this in a bit of an historical perspective, in which I will be dating myself. I got interested in these ideas as a teenager when I was in the 1960s. And when I did so, there was virtually no literature and no places to go. There were a couple of publications. There was the Freeman from Fee. There was Buckley's National Review. There was Human Events. There were a couple of fringe publishing houses. Some of the older viewers will remember the names: Arlington House, Devon Adair, Regnery. But these were all fringe publishing houses. And that was about all that there was. A few books a year, these sort of more conservative, except for the Freeman, of course, publications. And liberty was limited to that. Now, if you look at over the last certainly 15, 20 years, which has included the impact of Ron Paul's runs for the White House, what you see is a transformation. Partly this has been due to the technology of the internet. But as I like to put it, look at the number of think tanks, policy think tanks. Look at the other locations of educational outlets, the growing number of campus professors at colleges and universities. They may be few and far between in the big picture, but they're far more than they were 30 or 40 years ago, whose students can get on campus and take a course in economics, political science, history sometimes, philosophy, where they will at least have a tinge of an introduction to these ideas, if not a whole semester on them. And then if you count the internet of the websites, the blogs, the webinars that have been made possible, as I like to put it, if someone had taken a speed reading course and stayed up 24 hours a day just reading what came out from our side of the fence, broadly defined, you could not keep up with all of the literature. There has been an explosion of both availability and interest in the ideas of liberty using a slightly, admittedly, wide umbrella. That is an intellectual sea change. And now, with the libertarians getting a slightly higher public profile because of this bizarre election cycle that we're living through the nominations of Johnson and his running mate, and therefore the media paying attention to them, there's no reason why, slowly but surely, the growth of these ideas can be even far more than they have been over the last several decades.
Yeah, it's that ancient Chinese symbol for crisis. It's composed of two separate symbols, danger and opportunity.
Oh, yeah.
And that's what this presents to us. So anyway, we're out of time, Richard. Enjoyed the conversation as always, and it's going to be interesting to see how things develop, and I'm sure we'll be revisiting the political scene as we go on. Until next week.
Good being with you and our viewers.
Okay, thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.